As promised, this is part two of a response, responding to Alex O'Connor as he responded to Redeemed Zoomer. And Redeemed Zoomer made this video about 10 atheist dynamics that are, easily refuted. Then Alex is like, oh, really? Are they that easily refuted? And then he goes in to his response to this. And watching this response this time, I really believe that Alex O'Connor is have found a way to make hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't know if he's a multimillionaire at this point. It very possibly could be. But in the debate spectrum, I think he has found that if he keeps Christians riled up and if he keeps atheist tag-alongs following him, that as long as he can be a little misleading, that he can really get the atheist group to just follow him down these paths. But considering how smart Alex is, I'm beginning to think he's playing the atheist. Like, I really do, because the way he puts some of these things, I'm like, he knows better. He's had a fantastic education. Surely he knows better than these things that he is espousing so readily. So I really think he's playing some of you guys. I'm sorry about that. But so this is part two of the response, and there's about 3 new segments of the video I'll get into. Last time I made the video a little shorter. These next 2 will be a little longer in perspective. And let's just dive in. So he talked about the response to religions causing violence. And the way that Alex kind of dives into this in this second section, and if you were following the chapter titles, it would be People Do Evil in the Name of Religion, or in the name of religion. And so he kind of dives in, he says, whilst, and is that British, whilst? And I'm just going to say, while religious violence is motivated by religious beliefs, and this is actually Alex's comment here. He's like, your religious actions are come directly from your religious beliefs. And then he ties it more so. He says, religious violence is motivated by religious beliefs. That is not true. That is false equivalence. Just because someone believes in religious violence doesn't mean that their religion teaches religious violence. And somebody on the outside might even say, hey, your religion does teach this, and people on the inside like, I don't see that. I don't know what you're talking about. So he makes this false comparison here, unless maybe he's incorporating certain religions that absolutely do focus on violence. I'll let you gander at what I'm talking about there. But if there's certain religions that absolutely do focus on religious violence, that is the case. But he's poisoning the well here by saying that religious violence absolutely comes from religious beliefs. No, you can have violence by religious people that doesn't even come from their religious beliefs. And he just states this as an absolute fact, and it's not. So like I said, that's just one of these nuances where I'm like, Alex knows better than this. And I think he's just, trying to say things to stir people up. He goes on to say, he was talking about Hitler here. If he was lying and didn't actually believe in God, then it's worth asking why he would think that lying about religious views would make his fascist campaign more successful. Slick stuff here. Man, really slick stuff. So Hitler, it would have been pointless for him to speak about religion unless he was sure it would cause kind of like religious violence. It would cause this hatred towards their enemies, that it would fanaticize things and get it all stirred up. And no, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Do you think Hitler might have just been using religious rhetoric to identify with the people and get the people to identify with himself? That could absolutely be an angle that he was taking. You can go into a crowd of people and use things that are in their context to connect with them, and then steer them a totally different direction that's even against their own principles, if you're crafty. So it doesn't really work to just say, well, religion causes a lot of violence. Like already earlier in the video, it was down like to 7% religious wars caused by violence. And then you go lower than that if you subtract the Muslim element, if you drop it even lower, that way. But then to go back and say, Hitler, he stirred things up by religious, all this intimation, like, no. Hitler could have used religious rhetoric just to connect with the religious populace because maybe most of the populace was religious, but that doesn't mean he couldn't deceive them and turn things around and confuse people. That happens all the time. He says that a belief in the Creator God can give people the confidence to do all kinds of evil. And he just states that, like, if you do believe in a Creator God, it's linked to people doing all sorts of evil. No, I don't even know how he couples this together. He's just kind of baiting and inserting statements that really don't even make a lot of sense. If that's in your particular religion, yes. But if you believe in a Creator God, it makes you violent? Like what connection does he have here? If he's trying to relate to Old Testament wars, which I know gets brought up a lot, then that subtracts other elements about the God belief. It subtracts elements about his justice or his understanding, etc. So you can't just call it violence without qualifying what it is. It's almost the same mistake that people are making today, like the police are being violent because they arrested somebody that was trying to kill somebody. They used too much force. He was in the process of choking a person to death. The police officer still had 50 feet to run. He wasn't going to get there in time, so he decides to shoot the person. What? Qualify things like... So anyhow, we'll go on. Then he goes into the chapter section. If you lived elsewhere, you'd be an atheist, and he goes with Redeemed Resumer's response. But then he jumps in. Alex's rebuttal states, all beliefs are shaped by their geography. Huh? How do you just... This is a statement from materialism. This is assuming, this is the stance. So Alex O'Connor claims to be an agnostic. So an agnostic should, at the end of things, say, I don't know. They should be open, right? They should be open. If they were true skeptical, they should be open to more input or whatnot. And so does the spiritual realm exist? I don't know. So that would be his proper statement. But no, he is actually making a materialistic absolute here, which kind of reveals where he's at, or he's, like I said, maybe he's just stirring things up again. But if he absolutely does believe in materialism, then he's not as much of an agnostic as he says he is. But here's where this comes from. If you are an evolutionist, a materialist only, this world only, this is where this statement comes from, that our geography absolutely shapes the person. But then you have to qualify what do you mean by shapes the person? Are you saying in a positive sense or a negative sense? So for instance, take the understanding that a child who grew up in a home with an alcoholic, abusive father, how does that shape the child? Okay, maybe it makes the child incredibly introverted. Maybe the child is a little more headstrong and he sees his dad's an alcoholic, so he chooses to be an alcoholic. Or maybe he sees all the damage and pain and suffering that it caused in his life, so he says, I don't want anything to do with alcohol. So in all of those scenarios, you could say geography shaped the person. But by saying that, the person responded to the geography, but I just gave a classic case example of how you have 3 different outcomes. So you can't really say that geography shapes the person. But then I find this huge. Oh, I love it when these come out. I find this huge insight here where the atheist will not allow Christians to say, hey, well, how many people in the world believe in God? How many people just naturally believe in God? Oh, it's like the majority. Oh, so that's probably the truth. So that they immediately go, that's an ad populum fallacy. Oh, ad populum fallacy. But then you will state that in a country where you grow up, and if you're in a Muslim country, you're going to absolutely grow up to be Muslim. That influence there, that's more certain. Is that not like the same sort of ad populum misunderstanding? To say that geography shapes people, but then we absolutely know that that's not the case. So do people choose it? Like, this just doesn't work. Then he goes on, he said, if such a God did exist, we would really expect him to reveal himself more strongly and reliably to, say, Americans than to Indonesians. If this God really does exist, we would really expect him to reveal himself more strongly and reliably. That's really interesting. Like, if Alex is talking to everyone, Christian, I guess he's talking to an open audience. Like, Christians are going to tell you, like, God reveals himself mightily and strongly and reliably all the time. And knowing human nature, just knowing human nature, like, you can hand out free chocolate ice creams on a street, and most people go, man, thank you, I appreciate that. Thank you, I appreciate that. But there's one person be like, that's poisonous, and throw it on the ground. They're just not going to accept it, no matter what you do. Like, I don't want that from you. And so then for the atheist to go, well, God hasn't presented himself like reliably and as strongly as we would have hoped, then you're just basically presenting a subjective opinion, like, this is the way we would expect to see it. We who? We the populace, or we the individual? Yeah, I'm just going to leave that there. It's nothing like what we'd expect if there were a real universal God. It's just nothing the way we would expect. This is weird. Like, atheists and agnostics that don't reject God, that say all the evidence is not really evidence. Any kind of presentation to them is not the presentation. And then you actually talk to some that say it doesn't matter what's presented, they're never going to believe. Like, what kind of presentation from God do they actually want? Or do they want a presentation from God? Like, this isn't what I expected. This isn't the way I would expect it. And let's talk about this placement scenario first. Like, if God knows that a person would accept him in a different environment, why would he create him and put him in the bad environment? Or if God was going to create him and put him in the bad environment, but he knew that he would eventually find God anyway in the way that God reveals himself. We've already showed that the alcoholic father is responded to in a litany of different ways, many different fashions. And so you could actually put the free will human being that would eventually seek or turn to God, you could put them anywhere and they would actually be fine. The culture doesn't have to influence them in a certain direction. Then he goes into this section of how do you know which religion is true? And he says, so he's critiquing redeemed Zoomer, talking about there's no scientific proof that God exists. Well, by definition, science, my goodness, okay, I don't understand the phrasing here because it was in the video, and talking is different than reading, so I'm just going to read it again. No scientific proof that God exists. Well, by definition, science can. There's no scientific evidence for God. Oh, so that's what he's saying. He said, so Redeemed Zoomer has stated, you can't use scientific evidence to prove God. And Alex O'Connor is saying, well, scientific evidence, none of it has proved there's a God. And so where are we at on this? And this is just a classic case of subjective acceptance or rebuttal. And then he gets into later, he's talking about how Redeemed Zoomer is kind of caught in a catch-22 here, stating that science can't really prove there's a God. And then later, Redeemed Zoomer brings up some scientific points that do prove God. All this does is show there's a subjective slant on things. We can pick a different topic entirely. You could pick the topic of 50 plus 50 equals 100. And you could show that to somebody who wanted to be problematic. And they could say, no, that doesn't mean that. And you could say, well, if you take 50 and this 50 and put them beside each other, that equals this. And they could be like, I just don't see it. I don't understand that. I don't get it. They could do that. What Redeemed Zoomer is talking about here is that science is only going to present you enough evidence so that you can pick up the trail and mentally follow through. So in that case, science can't completely prove God, because all science ever does is take us to a certain location, to a certain place where we can actually use our own mind then and go forward with the thoughts. But that doesn't mean we wouldn't use science to try to get people's mind to that actual location where they would make an informed next step. It's like I just run across this video, like Christians are always talking about DNA looks designed, it looks coded. Which came first, the DNA code or the code reader in the DNA? Which came first? And now we're also finding out that the electrical stimulus, how great or small this electrical stimulus is, figures into all that as well. And that's information, that's scientific information that sure points a certain direction, but it's never going to completely close the gap. So for instance, an adult gets home and they see a kid with chocolate and peanut butter all over his face, and there's cookie crumbs all over the floor. And the parent goes, have you been in the cookie jar? And the kid goes, no, I haven't been in a cookie jar. Every parent out there would just assume the kid has been in the cookie jar and has been eating the cookies. And let's get really technical here. Let's say the parent said, have you been eating cookies? And the kid's like, no, I've not been eating cookies. The evidence points to the kid was eating cookies. And all of us would just go by that evidence. But that doesn't mean that some kid that was born with, like, let's say he had 170 IQ and he wanted to play a trick on his parents when he's 2 years old. And so he took cookies and smeared them. He smeared them. He's like, I'm going to get one over on my parents. You can't completely rule that out. But logic, for the most part, is going to dictate a direction, and we're going to have to make inductive leaps of faith. And what's funny to me is anybody that's not willing to take, that claims they're not going to take any sort of leaps of intellectual faith, and yet they do it all day long, just not when it comes to God. So, I think I can skip that next part because it all has to do with the scientific equation. Then he gets into demonic possession, and demonic possession actually being proof that God exists, claim Redeemed Zoomer. And one of Alex's responses was, we'll just have to take his word about somebody else's word That's not to say that I can prove that she wasn't possessed or that Dr. Gallagher's priest were mistaken or lying, blah, blah, blah. We got to take somebody's word. We got to take somebody's word. So basically, Redeemed Zoomer mentions a book where I believe a Dr. Gallagher had seen somebody or knew somebody that was demon-possessed, etc. And here Alex is like, we're just going to take somebody's word for this. We're going to take somebody's word about somebody's word about somebody's word. It's funny how we use this selectively. If a scientist gives us his word on something, oh, that's, yeah. If a historian gives us his word that he read something somewhere, oh, yeah, yeah. If a geologist gives his word, oh, yeah, yeah. If a lab full of people give their word, yeah, yeah, yeah. We just believe, we just endorse, we just say, oh, yeah, it's fine. This is a foundation to stand on. But if somebody tells us about a demonic event, we're like, oh, no, the reason they reject that is because it's not because of the information coming in. It's because of the tie of the information. The tie is to religion, so we want to reject religion, so we can't accept this information. I cannot remember the name. I read about this about 2 weeks ago. Psychology calls it, the demon face syndrome. That's what it's called, the demon face syndrome. So, where Alex is in his thinking, if he's abiding by his thinking and not just pulling people's legs, is he doesn't believe in demon possession because psychologists and psychiatrists have a name for it. It's obviously the demon face syndrome. Bam, done, finished. Science proves that there's no real demons because we've got a name for it. It's a condition. It's been known about. We have studied it. It's the demon face syndrome. But what's really interesting as we dig into some of this, all of the information that has come to these scientists is testimonial information. And we don't, this burns me up. In life, we take testimonial information. In school, we take testimonial information. And the backdrops of science, we have to take people's word for it. Even Hitchens is mentioned as this much. We have to just accept. We can't double check everything. There's no way to. We'll take word for it. We'll take word for it. We'll take word for it. Demon possession, I can't take somebody's word for it. That's selective investigation. That's selectivity. It's bias. So the demon face syndrome, here's what the scientists have found. Here's what they found. Is that some people have this condition where they see people's faces, not everybody's, but a few people's faces turn into demons. They grow pointy ears, and maybe they have a snout, and their eyes change colors, and they get scaly looking skin, and they look terribly demonic. And they say sometimes this face will come out of a screen at them. Sometimes the face will come out of a wall socket at them. Sometimes it'll just be on a blank wall and start coming to them. And so just because we label it, okay, scientists or psychologists, etc., know about this condition, and it's obviously just a mental condition because there is no spiritual realm. All of that is just materialistic assumption pressed onto the fact. That doesn't take us anywhere. It's not really what did Alex previously say about reliable presentation? Like the Bible tells us about angels and demons. It tells us about love and hate. It tells us about good and evil and angels and demons. And then we start getting information from people that say, man, that person over there, they've got a demon on them or in them or something, and it's driving me crazy. And oh, well, you have a condition. Because I take the testimony of other people that there is no spiritual realm. And so because of doubt and skepticism, there can only be materialism. I just know, even though I can't know. And so instead of actually taking input, we reject input because it's against our deep down biases. It says, what kind of evidence are you talking about here? Anecdotes? Testimony? It's just not doing it for me. Okay. People are always making claims about the way that things occurred. People are always making claims about the way things occurred. We do live in a reality where people lie. Yeah. We live in a reality where people want attention, so they lie for attention. Got it. We live in a reality, supposedly where people see things. Like even on this, it's funny to me that an atheist, let's say an atheist psychologist, would actually believe a person if they said, I'm seeing faces. And the atheist psychologist would believe that. They would believe, you're seeing demon faces, okay. They would just accept that testimony, but they wouldn't accept the reasoning testimony. They would think, no, it's just the chemicals in the brain that have done something. There is some kind of crazy drive in them. But how do we know the person is even seeing things? Maybe they're just lying from the very outset. Maybe all of these people were just liars. Maybe they were all just concocting the same thing. I would assure you that somebody that's never heard of the demon-faced syndrome, man, I wish I knew that word, metapharmacoposa something. It was really long and, it was a $5 word. Anyhow, I'm sure that those that have had that syndrome have probably never heard about that syndrome in anybody else because it's a pretty rare place. And then somebody on the other side of the world over here probably has experienced the same exact thing and are both of these people malfunctioning in exactly the same fashion and coming up with the same ideas? Why not just believe you're a liar, y'all are just liars, but then they're talking about the same thing? It's funny that we would reject the source but not be critical enough to reject everything as just, a flat out lie. So it talks about demonic possession. Then he goes into the Bible has contradictions. And he brings up the lineage of Jesus, where in one passage of Scripture it has the lineage tree, and then a second passage of Scripture it's got a differing lineage tree, and that they're different because they are. They're different. And then the claim by most Christians would be, hey, this is probably from Mary's side of the family. Maybe this is from Joseph's side of the family. Maybe this over here is talking about grandfathers, and this is more specific because you can tell the lists are different even though they have lots of similarities in them. And then there's some kind of reconciliation mentioned that I think it was Joseph might have been adopted into the family, and thus there's two names given, and maybe one is the adopted dad, or maybe one's the real dad, or maybe there's some kind of reason. But then he subtly just states I would just say that proposed solutions to many of them seem to, shall we say, be theologically motivated. It just seems to be theologically motivated. No, that doesn't work. What he's saying is because we already believe in God, now we're trying to reconcile these things. Well, maybe that's the way you see it, but maybe looking at people's actual lineage, we see things like people are called by their first name, but then they respond to their second name. And then when they get into the military, they're called by their last name. And then you could be at a party and hey, have you seen Frankie around? No, I hadn't seen Frankie around. Hey, have you seen James? No, I hadn't seen James. You liar, there's James right there. No, that's Frank. There are very real overlaps in reality. And I think this actually goes further to show that the New Testament is actually a living and true document, because it has real human implications to it, like one person quoting maybe Mary's lineage and somebody else quoting Joseph's lineage. What if it didn't? What if it was just the exact same thing? What would be stated then? Oh, well, they're just exact copies all the time. And that was actually by criminal forensic psychology and whatnot. If you've got 4 criminals that come in and you ask them what they were doing Friday night, and they all give you the same exact story verbatim, it's a lie, because they got together and thought about how to do this. And so if all of the Gospels were just copies of this copy of that copy, and somebody added, etc., when they got these different versions of the names, they should have just, they wouldn't have got that, first of all. But then why didn't somebody come in and go, oh, y'all got the wrong ones, and we're trying to keep this scam alive, baby. We got to get rid of these other ones. But that's not what happened. We kept both strains, and there's people that knew about both strains. Also said are they really the most natural interpretations of the text? If you're not already motivated to harmonize the accounts, it's not impossible to reconcile them in this kind of way. Doesn't the need to do so slightly lower your credence in the text? No, it doesn't slightly lower the credence in the text, because I realize that there are things that appear ironic, and there's things that are ironic, and they say both things, both directions, and it's fine. It actually gets into a part where there's 2 Bible verses that, he's like, was Jesus's crucifixion before the Passover, as in this passage, or after the Passover in this passage? But all that has to be really considered there is how many times through scriptures, how many times in scriptures are there metaphors? We use metaphors today. If I was a good YouTuber, I'd have had a metaphor that I could have referenced. But how many times does the Bible use a metaphor to hint at something? It was like, and the day was dawning, and I'm just making this up off the top of my head, but the day was dawning, and we're actually talking about the arrival of righteousness. Or what about that passage of scripture, and it was night, which carried the implication that it was probably getting to be night, but it was actually spiritual night. And if you reconcile these 2 passages of scripture, and it says something like, on the first day of unleavened bread, they were slaying the lamb of the Passover, the Lamb of God, something along those lines. First there, to us Americans, first only means numerical digit order. First is first, and first is always first, and that's the only way we see it. That's not the way it is in Greek. First, or you could translate it as like you think of protagonist. Protagonist doesn't mean the first person of the story, or the only person of the story, or it means the main character of the story. So the foundation of first here has pro in it, and it is a main concept. So when you say the first day of unleavened bread, you could, in our translation, it could be the main day of unleavened bread. And then if you go with that, the main day of unleavened bread is when they slew the sacrificial lamb. What a beautiful way to refer to Jesus. So there isn't some kind of contextual strain there, except by people that aren't willing to think about how people do things. Like if somebody says that if a boxer steps in the ring and says, I'm going to kill him tonight, and he beats the fool out of dude, and dude's unconscious on the ground, he comes out, I don't go, dude, you're a liar. Why am I a liar? You said you were going to kill him. That would be me putting a strain on the scenario, not putting the strain on the boxer. It's not the way these things work. So again, I am more convinced than ever that Alex is probably pulling some people's legs, because some of the arguments that he gives are just so weak and redundant that we've heard so much before. And so we'll get to part 3 here in a few days after this video dies.